Yeah.
Okay, so in your lectures at Columbia, the sentences along the place, you talk about a page-hugging reader versus a page-turning reader. What exactly is a page-hugging reader, and is that who you're writing for?
Yeah, a page-turning reader is just the opposite of a page-turner. A page-turner wants to get to the next page as soon as possible, whereas the page-hugger is so enamored of and bewitched by the phrasing on the page that the reader wants to savor it almost indefinitely and feels as if the treasures of the sentence or the paragraph are almost inexhaustible, that you can probe the intimacy between individual words or the vowels within individual words, etc. So it's someone who is reluctant to move forward simply because he or she is afraid that he or she will be missing something. Something in the acoustics, something in the placement of the words on the page. Yeah.
Now, when we were going over your works that you've written and edited, we came across that you were a co-editor of the Grammar Desk Reference. So now, can you maybe explain your relationship with that, like why you did that, and then the relationship between that and your writing, which is, sometimes you're kind of playing with language a little bit.
Yeah. I think the reason why I was drawn to grammar from an early age was the fact that I grew up in a household where very few words were ever spoken, and I did not acquire the language skills that a young person should have been acquiring. So as I grew older and older, I became more and more aware of my deficiencies, my insufficient grasp of syntax and idiom and vocabulary. So I started reading a lot of vocabulary improvement books and also books on grammar, to the point where I must have read at least 250 books on grammar, punctuation, usage, etc. And some of these books were massive dictionaries of usage that might be 600, 700 pages long. And I found these books even more absorbing than the novels I was reading at the time. And I think basically, in my own writing, I wanted to be meticulous, and I was kind of surprised when I learned where the word meticulous actually comes from. If you trace it back to its root, it actually means careful out of fear. So as a person who grew up with a clear sense, a very pronounced sense of my own inadequacy as a speaker and as a writer, I wanted to make sure I wasn't making mistakes in my writing. So I became obsessed with punctuation, especially obsessed with the few places where you can still see impeccable, exquisite punctuation, such as the New Yorker magazine. So I used to read the New Yorker magazine sometimes solely for the punctuation. I would look at every single comma and ask myself, why is that comma there? For example, virtually every periodical in the United States, when writing a sentence about a person's death, will state the sentence in such a way that it will read, she lived in Rutherford until her death in 1989. Now, the New Yorker would put a comma in front of in 1989, and I would wonder, why did the New Yorker insist that you would have to say she lived in Rutherford until her death, comma, in 1989, or whatever date I gave. And then it dawned on me that if you don't put that comma in, the prepositional phrase at the end of the sentence, in 1989 or whatever, has a restrictive or limiting function, narrowing down which particular death we're talking about, as if the sentence were attempting to distinguish between her death in 1989 and another death in 1991. And nobody else, no other periodical in this country is observant of that punctuational nicety. And similarly, in newspapers you'll see sentences like, he was arrested at his home in New Brunswick. And the New Yorker would put a comma in front of New Brunswick if it had to be made clear that the culprit had only one residence. Because if you don't put that comma in, the suggestion is that you're distinguishing one residence from another. So I would simply sit and read the New Yorker, especially some of the great writers like the late Joseph Mitchell, and I would get so absorbed in the exquisite punctuation that I would lose sight of what the content of the article was. But this was often after I'd already read the piece, simply for content the first time. But I often find, especially these days, especially after having written that grammar book and because of my intensifying obsession with grammar, that often when I'm reading the syntax. I'm reading the interrelationships between words, the interrelationships between the sounds of the vowels and the consonants within words, etc., which is not the best way to read if reading comprehension or retention is your aim. But I find it a much more aesthetically pleasing way to read. And I often read books backwards as well. I'll start with the last sentence and then the second last sentence, etc. Because I'm not really much a person who's concerned with plot. I really don't care what happens, what has happened, who did what to whom, because our experiences are pretty much universal. We all undergo the same, or many of the same traumas and joys and exhilarations and disappointments, etc. So I like to be seduced by the language itself, and I think that you should be able to turn to any good book and simply put your finger at random on a sentence, and that sentence alone should be, in its own way, almost a self-sufficient work of art. That I find in too much of the stuff that I read that a really good sentence is surrounded by sentences that are kind of lackluster, or sentences that ultimately are not going to seduce me. Yeah.
Could you talk about semicolons?
The semicolon is often these days disparaged as an antiquity. Many writers on usage have said that there's a kind of 19th century stink that adheres to the semicolon. Donald Barthelme made a really disparaging remark about semicolons. I think he referred to it as some kind of ugly, tiny little insect or something like that. I forget. Maybe an earwig or something like that. The semicolon, I think, has its place in expository and argumentative writing. It certainly doesn't have its place in dialogue. Sometimes when I'm teaching creative writing classes, I'm dumbstruck when students have maybe a paragraph of dialogue and there's a semicolon between two of the sentences in the dialogue, because we don't. I never hear semicolons in dialogue when I hear people talking. I generally hear a lot of dashes between phrases and clauses. So I'm not against the semicolon. I occasionally use it myself. I'm more fond of the colon. I think that the colon is an undervalued punctuational device. And I'm extremely obsessed with the hyphen, which is the most difficult to master of the punctuation marks. Even though most people think of the hyphen as simply the means by which you divide a word into syllables at the end of a line of text, but since we write in computers these days with word wrap function on the word processing software, unless we're doing right justification of the margins, we don't have to worry about dividing words into syllables. So I became fascinated with the hyphenation patterns in the New Yorker, because just as the New Yorker, at least up until the end of the William Shawn administration, because the punctuation and the grammar in the New Yorker unfortunately has gone downhill with the subsequent editors, but I used to read through the New Yorker and look at every single hyphen and ask myself, why is that hyphen there? And it was often difficult to answer that question. And one time after I was suffering through a very traumatic break